Last week, I found myself sitting in this trendy, high-end cafe. You know exactly the type. Polished concrete floors that look permanently wet, vast sheets of glass, minimalist furniture with sharp angles, and the menu offering the same avocado toast you can get in Manhattan, Dubai, or Shoreditch. Everything was pristine. The ambient music was that perfect, unobtrusive, global, chill playlist. It was designed to be the ultimate comfortable space. But as I sat there, a strange sense of anxiety started to creep in. I looked at the table surface synthetic, perfectly smooth, cold to the touch. I looked at the walls, anodized aluminum, absolutely seamless. I realized I was frantically searching for a scratch, a stain, a crack in the plaster, anything that proved a human had actually lived here or touched this place. There was nothing. It hit me that I wasn't actually somewhere. I was in a non-place, a vacuum designed for the frictionless passage of people and capital. This wasn't just minimalism, it felt like an architectural lobotomy. The environment was so terrified of friction, so obsessed with being clean, that it had stripped away not just the dirt, but the history, the locality, and the very texture of reality. It felt less like a room and more like the inside of a smartphone screen. And that, I realized, is exactly the point. We are building a world that is waging a war on memory. That feeling, that disorientation in a space that's designed to be perfectly accommodating and yet completely anonymous. That's exactly where I need to start this. We are going to do a deep dive into this global obsession with smoothness. Our mission is to trace how this relentless war on friction, on memory, how it shows up not just in buildings, but in our social systems and political policy, and even in how we design our digital lives. I was looking for a scratch, but the reality is this smooth, seamless aesthetic. It's the signature of a really fundamental shift in how we structure society.
And what you experienced in that cafe, that feeling of alienation or anxiety, it's a physical manifestation of a huge philosophical tension. We're looking at what you could call the core conflict defining our late-stage societies. You can boil it down to the tension between universalism on one hand and particularism on the other.
Okay, so universalism is that global drive for efficiency, right?
Yeah.
The same polished floor, the same menu, no matter where you are in the world.
Precisely. It's the drive for smoothness, standardization, for placelessness. And particularism is the opposite. It's the resistance.
It's the local identity, the specific history, the messy, beautiful friction that actually defines a place.
Exactly. And when this universal drive for smooth global efficiency weakens our traditional anchors, things like community or geographical roots or a shared history, it creates these very real psychological costs. Sociologists call it a deep sense of ontological insecurity.
Ontological insecurity. That just means rootlessness, right?
Yeah. It's a profound rootlessness. Essentially, the faster the world moves and the smoother it becomes, the less sure people are about who they are or where they actually belong. So this war on memory in architecture, it's really a war on belonging.
Okay, let's unpack that. Let's start right where the experience began, in the literal, physical space of the city. The modern city was supposed to be the great melting pot. I mean, the whole expectation was that denser populations, faster mobility, global urbanization, all of this would force us into proximity and enrich our social lives. But the research suggests the opposite has happened.
It really has. What's emerged, especially in American high-end urbanism, but it's spreading everywhere, is a city structure that seems actively designed to eliminate the stranger. It privatizes every single interaction possible.
Some people call this the antisocial dream of elite urbanism.
That's the term. It's a vision where, if you have enough money, you never have to share space or public resources or even an interaction with anyone who isn't already known to you. Think about it. Private schools, private clubs, individual ride shares, delivery services that mean you never even have to go to the shop. The goal is total efficiency and total control over your immediate environment.
But we know that complexity and friction, that's where innovation actually comes from. The data on urban economies is really clear on this, isn't it?
It's absolutely critical. And the studies are fascinating. They confirm that urban productivity and innovation don't just increase proportionally with density, they scale superlinearly.
Okay, superlinearly. That sounds like jargon. What does that actually mean for a city?
It means that if you double the population of a city, the productivity of that city doesn't just double, which would be linear growth, it more than doubles. The output, the patents, the new knowledge, it all scales disproportionately because of that increased density, because of the collision of different people and the forced interaction that creates diversity.
So if a city designs its systems like using personalized transportation or even private tunnels, to flatten out that necessary diversity and interaction.
They're literally destroying the engine of invention.
They're prioritizing individual throughput over the very conditions that allow for new ideas to emerge.
They are. They're sacrificing the collective conditions for innovation in favor of individual convenience. And the result is you hollow out the value of shared public space. Which brings us right back to infrastructure, specifically to transit.
I always hear that debate in transit planning, ridership versus coverage.
Right. Do you optimize for high-frequency routes that help existing commuters, which is ridership, or do you spread service out wide to provide access for more people, which is coverage?
And it's always framed as just an efficiency question.
It is, but we have to look deeper. There's a moral dimension here. What kind of social beings are our cities helping us become? A transit theorist, Jarrett Walker, he points out that when we design systems around avoidance...
Designing transit so you never have to sit next to a stranger.
Exactly. When you do that, you lose a crucial mechanism for building social trust. You're trading this collective reality for individual preference. And you're implicitly telling everyone the other person is a hazard you should design your day around avoiding.
But that shared experience, even if it's just strangers moving together on a bus, it's vital.
It is. It's a low-stakes, repeated demonstration of a predictable, functioning civil society. It builds trust.
And we have these massive concrete monuments to the opposite ideal, like the Katy Freeway in Houston.
The Katy Freeway is the perfect, infamous example. It's the largest freeway in the U.S., 26 lanes wide.
26.
And yet it's still famously, chronically choked with traffic.
Yeah.
It's infrastructure that moves bodies, but it absolutely fails to connect lives. It's the ultimate paradox. The more we design for maximum frictionless throughput, the more we negate connection. And often, we even negate the efficiency we were aiming for in the first place. You just end up in a 26-lane traffic jam.
It's a negative feedback loop built right into the concrete.
And infrastructure is never neutral. It is fundamentally shaping our behavior and our social norms. Think about the QWERTY keyboard.
The one we all use.
Right. It was actually designed to slow down early typists to prevent the keys from jamming on mechanical typewriters. It is not the most efficient layout. Yet, it stuck. Why? Because that initial infrastructural decision locked in all future development. Switching systems became too costly, not just financially, but socially, because everyone had already learned it.
I see the link now. It's not just a technical inertia, it's a social inertia. The physical choices we make, a wide freeway versus a dense rail line, they lock in not just engineering decisions, but long-term social patterns. And it makes it prohibitively expensive to try and foster social trust later on.
Exactly. And you can see this so clearly in public budgets. If you cut the frequency of a bus service, ridership drops. That drop then becomes the justification for more budget cuts and more service reductions. It's a powerful negative feedback loop that actively hollows out public life.
But the opposite has to be true as well. Small, almost minor urban investments can kick off a positive loop, can't they? Things like better street lighting or just a well-placed public bench.
Absolutely. Or just maintaining a frequent bus schedule that makes the system feel predictable and reliable. These small changes foster what we call relational trust. When you feel safe, when you feel seen, when the public system is predictable, it reduces the psychological pressure of just navigating a dense, diverse city.
And we know how important that is. Harvard's longest-running study on happiness found that strong relationships are the best predictor of well-being, way more than income or status.
And more recently, studies are showing that even those brief, casual interactions with strangers, a nod on the sidewalk, a quick chat in the park, they can lift your mood and actively combat the growing epidemic of loneliness.
But the city has to provide the stage for those interactions to happen.
And for decades, the design imperative has been to move people through a space. Fast, clean, efficient passage. We've totally neglected the quiet spaces that let people simply be. We need sidewalks that don't rush you off, public benches that invite you to linger, and accessible, unhurried parks and libraries.
So designing out the friction is a really subtle but powerful way of prioritizing a kind of emotional regulation, of social control. It's like the rise of the therapeutic state manifesting in urban planning. You want to remove the sting of the other by removing the chance for a deep encounter altogether.
Yes. We're so focused on regulating potential conflict or discomfort that we eliminate the very conditions for building bonds. If the environment is too smooth for complexity, it's too smooth for community. This obsession with seamless, predictable movement is fundamentally corrosive to democratic, diverse city life.
The search for smoothness and speed doesn't stop at the city limits, though. It's the driving force behind our entire economic structure.
Let's pivot from the physical architecture to the architecture of society itself. We've moved from a society of producers, which was built on values like prudence, durability, long-term security,
to what's called a society of consumers.
and the society of consumers relies fundamentally on three things: transience, speed, and waste. This is a total reversal of our core values. Duration is actively degraded in favor of novelty and velocity.
Which means that happiness is no longer tied to the actual satisfaction of a need, like owning a durable car for 20 years.
Correct. Happiness is tied to an ever-rising volume and intensity of desires. It's the hedonic treadmill. The goal is not satisfaction, because satisfaction ends the consumption process. The goal is perpetual desire. The value of possessions isn't in their solidity or permanence anymore. It's measured by how quickly you can squeeze pleasure out of them and then how quickly you can dispose of them to get the next new thing.
And this pressure for fluidity, for constant motion, it also shapes the ideal human being for this new economy. This is where we get the concept of the zero-drag human, which came out of Silicon Valley.
Initially, zero drag was an engineering term, meaning frictionless movement. But it quickly became an ideal description for labor. The zero-drag human is the ultimate liquid asset. They are completely unattached and unobligated.
Unattached and unobligated. That sounds less like a high performer and more like someone rootless.
It's the ideal market subject. The zero-drag employee has to be instantly available for extra work, ready to relocate without question, and, this is crucial, they have to shun long-term high-commitment obligations.
Like family, kids, a mortgage, anything that raises their drag coefficient.
Exactly. They must be someone who will leave the company without complaint or fuss when they're no longer needed. They're encouraged to swim rather than walk or surf rather than swim, a perpetually ungrounded existence.
So the market is rewarding a life without roots or history, and it's basically selling that rootlessness back to us as freedom.
And technology is the perfect enabler for this. It allows for this frictionless, transient lifestyle, but at the same time, it creates new systems of exclusion and control that are far more refined than old-fashioned coercion. We see this in the practice known as negative surveillance.
Now, we usually think of surveillance as Big Brother watching everyone, just cataloging data. What's a negative surveillance?
It's filtering. It's exclusion rather than observation. It's a technological sieve. The goal isn't necessarily to record what you do, but to categorize you and ensure that certain types of people, those deemed unprofitable or flawed consumers, are just flushed away, snubbed.
Can you give us an example of how that plays out?
Sure. Consider the systems used for customer service calls. Computer systems categorize callers, often on a scale. You might be at one front, a first-class profitable client, you get answered immediately. Or you might be relegated to a category some internal memos actually called the pond life. You're put at the back of the queue, maybe even disconnected. The software doesn't invent the discrimination, but it makes the pre-existing divisive exclusionist practices instantaneous and automatically efficient.
It's an efficient cleaning job then, ensuring only the most compliant and eager consumers stay in the game.
Exactly. It's negative surveillance, serving the task of cutting out anyone who's immune to marketing or who lacks the cash or credit to be profitable.
And this market logic, this idea of selecting the best commodity, gets institutionalized into state policy when we look at things like points-based immigration systems.
That's the perfect parallel. When a country establishes a points-count system to attract the brightest and the best, as the UK proposed, it's transferring the market rule of selecting the most valuable commodity on the shelf to selecting human beings. It institutionalizes that market logic. You're selecting people according to perceived national economic needs, and the task of keeping yourself saleable is left entirely to the private worries of individuals.
So this war on friction now extends into our subjective experience of time itself. It's driven by this consumption model and digital culture. If the architecture imposed a lobotomy by stripping away history, digital life imposes an eternal present.
That is the temporal manifestation of the war on memory. We are shifting into what's known as pointillist time. The traditional idea of historical progress, building floor by floor in a narrative sequence, is being replaced by the concept of an eternal present, a succession of intense, disconnected instants.
Like a hodgepodge of kaleidoscopic changes, where the moments don't necessarily relate to the ones that came before or after.
Exactly. Every situation is treated as an entity in its own right, pregnant with revolutionary potential, open to the sudden eruption of the new. This profoundly de-emphasizes chronology and narrative. And digital culture, with its accelerated cascades of information on social media feeds, it distributes these countless decontextualized signs. We see images, headlines, fragments, all ripped out of any developmental sequence. And this makes creating a cohesive, personal, or collective narrative increasingly difficult. The fragments threaten to become hegemonic.
Hegemonic, meaning they become the dominant way we perceive reality.
Yes.
And it's hard to build a life story if you are living entirely in the now and your sense of identity is just constantly being refreshed by the feed. This creates that profound rootlessness we talked about, which is why electronic communication networks, social media, became so attractive. They offer this illusion of connection without the messy friction of real commitment.
In this liquid modern world, the swarm tends to replace the group.
The swarm versus the group, what's the difference?
A group requires leadership, hierarchy, a division of labor, tools for long-term survival. A swarm is just an aggregate of self-propelled units. They're united by what's called mechanical solidarity. They replicate similar patterns of conduct, but they aren't integrated into a complex, interdependent structure.
And the security comes from the numbers, right? That comforting but often false belief that so many freely choosing human beings couldn't all be fooled at the same time.
It's safety and replication, not solidarity and purpose. And the enormous attraction of social networking is its built-in safety device, the possibility of instant, trouble-free, painless disconnection. It offers a safer, more controlled option, precisely because you can avoid the inherent risk and unpredictability of face-to-face encounters. When you leave a group chat, you haven't burned a bridge, you've just closed an app.
So freedom in this liquid modern age isn't defined by the act of achieving what you desire, which takes effort and commitment. It's defined by the convenience of just getting rid of the unwanted.
That is the ultimate alignment with consumer culture. The act of severing the relationship is frictionless. But the primary casualty of this instantaneous freedom is the social bond itself. And the emotional toll of this transient existence is enormous. It leads to high stress, depression, even as societies grow richer, because that necessary framework of long-term mutual commitment is being deliberately removed.
Okay, we've mapped this war on friction from the seamless floor of that cafe through the transient life of the zero-drag human and into the fractured timeline of digital life. If globalized modern architecture, the international style, was the first manifestation of this placelessness, then the natural next step is to look at the resistance. Where do memory and locality fight back against this tyranny of smoothness?
Well, the most potent intellectual response came in the form of critical regionalism. This is a movement that arose as a progressive attempt to counter global homogeneity without just resorting to a simplistic regressive nostalgia. It's trying to build a modern world that still has roots.
So it's not just building an old-fashioned house with a thatched roof. It has to be modern, but also locally rooted.
Absolutely. It seeks to resolve what the philosopher Paul Ricoeur called the fundamental dilemma. How to become modern and to return to sources, how to revive an old, dormant civilization and take part in universal civilization. Critical regionalism tries to synthesize the best of global, universal technology with the profound, specific context of the local.
And this is where we have to look closely at Kenneth Frampton's 6 points for this architecture of resistance. What did he say we have to prioritize instead of that smooth, abstract form?
He argued that we have to critically adopt modern architecture's universal qualities, but we must heavily prioritize the geographical and sensual context. The emphasis has to shift to topography, climate, and light. And it has to focus on the construction methods, the tectonic form, rather than mere scenography.
Let's break that down. Tectonic form versus scenography.
Scenography is like theatrical scenery. It's the purely visual, abstract aesthetic that's easily replicable anywhere. A sheet of polished glass, a smooth aluminum panel. Tectonic form, however, deals with the structural honesty of how materials meet, how they're crafted, and how the building responds to physics. It speaks to the craft, to a sense of permanence, and crucially, Frampton emphasized the sense of touch over the visual sense alone.
The deliberate reintroduction of texture.
Yes, of physicality, of the inherent friction that the smooth, reflective glass box tries to eliminate. You're designing for the body, not just for the fleeting eye.
That's a powerful critique of my cafe experience. A design that prioritized pure visuality, clean, light, seamless, but totally failed the tactile test. But when architects try to integrate the local, they often fall into different traps. Some try to just copy historical forms directly.
Yes, and that's the trap of seeking a pure origin through direct copying, maybe using specific historical imagery or religious aesthetics. The critique of that approach is that it often just becomes a formalist visual game. It lacks a mental echo. It turns history into a costume.
But others approach this with more interpretation, more philosophical depth. What about architects like Arata Isozaki in Japan?
Isozaki was struggling with this exact problem: how to be modern, while retaining a traditional character in a society that was changing incredibly fast. His solution was to bring the past and present together by shifting the meanings of historical elements. His concern with the past was one of thought, the ideas and concepts behind traditional structures, not just imitating their superficial forms. That allows for progress while retaining cultural continuity.
And then Charles Correa introduced another non-visual, purely functional element: climate.
Correa argued that climate should be a primary determinant linking the local and the global. He said that buildings, whether they're churches or mosques or houses, have to adapt their form-like shifting from an enclosed box to a courtyard based on hot, humid climates to ensure proper ventilation and shading. It's a focus on indispensable functional adaptation. But as societies get more affluent and demand tall, air-conditioned buildings, that simple climate solution has to evolve.
And that evolution leads us directly to the most dynamic approach to resistance: the concept of hybridity.
Hybridity is the intellectual and cultural integration of diverse elements, bodies, signs, practices into something new. It recognizes that culture is always unfixed, always variable. This actively challenges the idea that a nationality or a culture has to remain distinct and pure. So the effective resistance strategy becomes reinterpretation, or what's called new locality. It avoids the historical cut and paste while fully incorporating modern progress and technology.
And we see this tension playing out intensely in regions that have undergone incredibly rapid state-led modernization, like Doha in Qatar.
Doha is the perfect high-stakes laboratory for this conflict. The city globalized almost overnight, prioritizing massive, iconic projects, the Tornado Tower, the Aspire Zone, specifically to establish a global brand and attract capital. These structures, often steel and glass high-rises, they represent the abstract and conflicted space imposed by global capital. They prioritize shock value and size, and they often lead to the exclusion of local identity. They lose that haptic ability, the connection to human scale and touch.
But even within that context, we see these critical acts of resistance and attempts at synthesis.
Absolutely. Look at the Museum of Islamic Art, designed by IMP. It's a profoundly contemporary building, but it consciously negotiates between modernity and tradition. Pei didn't just mimic a traditional mosque. Instead, he extracted the fundamental geometric principles key to Islamic heritage, the square, the octagon, the cross shape, to generate entirely new forms. And he uses local, textured materials like limestone and granite, but combines them with global materials like steel and glass. It achieves a critical balance.
And there's also a major state-led initiative trying to foster this balance, the Masharab Downtown Project.
Masharab is a massive government project focused on creating a cultural, unique Qatari architectural language. It tries to recreate the traditional neighborhood structure, the Farij concept, with its narrow, shaded streets and courtyards. But it uses modern building types like apartments for young professionals. It's a state-led effort to provide continuity, belonging, and familiarity. It's blending the successful life systems of the past with modern, energy-efficient technology. It's an official attempt to provide that collective cultural meaning in an age where that meaning is rapidly dissolving.
So the search for identity and our relation to place, it's dynamic, it's complicated, not static.
Exactly. But the urge to seek that identity is not a luxury. It's a necessity, especially when you're faced with the imposition of foreign values or just overwhelming rapid modernization. The architectural and social challenges all stem from this core problem of the liquid modern age, the lack of defined collective cultural meanings.
So the battle against the frictionless environment is essentially the battle to reestablish that meaning and identity. And that means moving past just copying the past and embracing the messy reality of contradiction.
And we see cultural movements that are embracing this complexity. The Mexican architects known as the crack generation, for example. They abandoned the obsession with establishing a singular national identity. They chose a position free from nostalgia and melancholy. And they created a new tradition by accepting that their locality exists in these contradictions and hybrid forms.
They embrace the cracks, literally. And we see similar resistance in architects like Wang Shu in China.
Wang Shu won the Pritzker Prize, and he's famous for designing ordinary buildings. He actively resists the dictates of neoliberal capitalism and that obsession with global iconicity. His work prioritizes human scale, local materials, and craft, the very things the smooth global aesthetic tries to erase.
So these acts of resistance, they show that change doesn't require another massive iconic skyscraper. It can be a small-scale, local intervention.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Teddy Cruz's work on the U.S.-Mexican border is a perfect example. He creates these prefabricated houses designed to be open to individual and community hybridization. He calls them micro-heterotopias. These projects see cities not as single, uniform entities, but as networks of locally adapted, complex pockets of life. They show the ability of small change to affect bigger social changes by providing environments where personalized identity and community structure can reemerge, deliberately building local friction back in.
So if we synthesize all of this, the rejection of the smooth, the resistance to the zero-drag identity, the architectural pushback through tectonic form and hybridity, what is the central finding here?
The key concept is reinterpretation, or new locality. It's the potential for engaging fully with global requirements, the technology, the speed, the large structures, while fiercely maintaining local meaning. This approach avoids just pasting history onto a modern box. Instead, it involves analyzing the slow, evolved solutions of the past and skillfully adapting imported modern forms, constrained by local image and craft, into a truly hybrid practice. This continuous search for balance is what defines a new, robust tradition across barriers and between cultures.
So the true definition of a robust, adaptable society might not be found in the seamless efficiency of a polished, globalized non-place. It's found in the deliberate reintroduction of texture, of history, and of the beautiful, messy friction of a complex shared reality. The resistance, whether it's through a traditional architectural screen or a revitalized public square, is the conscious act of claiming back time and space from the eternal, smooth present.